everybody. This is Chris at Infinite Realities, and I have one of the writers that was very formative in my comic experience, one of the first writers whose names I ever noticed. We all have that experience where you realize there's a human being behind these things, and I'm getting to talk to him right now, Mr. Ron Marz. How are you, man?
I am well, Chris. How are you?
We're doing well. I'm getting to talk to my favorite creators right now, and I don't know, life could be worse, right?
Well, this is what we have for social interaction, and I think, and honestly, for me, like doing these kind of things, it's, convention store appearances and interviews and podcasts, this is the social interaction now. This is what we've got, so I'm happy to do it.
Yeah, I haven't been. There's three of us who own it. One of our partners, I haven't been in the same room as him in weeks now. So,
and that's the way you like it, right?
Don't tell him I said that. No, he's great. I miss him. Listen, so we were talking a little bit like life doing well for you during the great weirdness.
Pretty much, I think, and probably most creators would tell you this. This is, I have apparently been in quarantine for 30 years because, this is pretty much my everyday existence anyway. You come into the office that's in my house and sit down and write and edit and whatever else needs to be done that day. The only real difference for me is, I don't go to the gym once a day. I don't stop for a beer on the way home from the gym to wreck all the work I just did. But that's pretty much it. I suspect most freelancers are in that same boat of this is kind of what every day is like for us. Now the rest of the world gets to know what it's like. Although I think, I've got work piled up here and there's never a moment where I go, oh, I wonder what I should add to my Netflix queue. I haven't watched TV in a long time. So there's always something to do. I guess that's the main difference. I totally get people being home and sort of being at loose ends because they don't have something to do.
Well, what are you working on right now? What's been the project you've got going on?
Well, there's a bunch of there's, like I can show you stuff that I'm not supposed to show you, but there's this, so, but a bunch of it hasn't been announced yet. So the last month or so, part of my duties as the editor-in-chief of Ominous Press has been to shepherd, along with Keith Champagne, who's doing the bulk of the work, the Jim Starlin Dreadstar Returns Kickstarter that we're publishing. And we're actually on the last weekend of the Kickstarter, even as we speak. I think we've got 30 hours left, something like that. So I'm actually editing the book and editing the guidebook that goes along with it. So that's what a bunch of my time has been spent doing. But also writing stuff. I just got the final files for the Green Lantern story that Darryl Banks and I have in the Green Lantern 80th anniversary special that will be out next month, I think now. So that just got put to bed, and the writer's lot is usually juggling. You always have 3 or 4 projects going at the same time, and you tend to work on whichever one has an editor that's barking the loudest.
Well, and obviously you've worn both hats, the writer and editor, so you have very special insight on that. Well,
I'm actually glad that I've done sort of both sides of the table, because you understand the needs of both sides a little bit better. When you as a writer, not to screw your editor. You know what they're going through. And as an editor, that, sometimes people, real life happens. There are other demands upon people's time that, especially in the current age in which we live. So I think it's good to work both sides of that street because you understand both sides of the street better.
Sure. Well, I gotta be honest. You mentioned the Green Lantern story that you and Darryl Banks are coming to. As someone who was first introduced to Green Lantern with Kyle Rayner, I'm stoked.
Oh, cool, man. Well, I got to say, I tweeted yesterday that I think the art job that Darryl did on the 80th anniversary story is just easily one of his best art jobs, if not his best Green Lantern art job. It's really just a phenomenal looking thing. And I think it's the first Green Lantern stuff that Daryl's ever drawn digitally.
Really?
He worked, obviously when we were on the book, he was working, old school traditional pencil on paper and then being inked by Romeo Tangal or Terry Austin or Cam Smith. So this story is the first time Daryl's drawn Green Lantern pages, working digitally, penciling and inking himself, and it's just phenomenal looking stuff. I got to look at the final letters, final colors, and everything this week, and it's a really spectacular looking story. I'm really happy with it.
Well, his art is amazing. We had to last minute cancel the talk with him today, so we're postponing that. But like I own some Daryl Banks art. Like tracked him down years ago at a convention.
Oh, good deal. I don't have enough of it, frankly. I've got a cover. I've got some pages from Green Lantern Silver Surfer.
Oh.
But I really need some more Daryl. Of course, I was going to say I need some pages from this story, but they don't exist. Nice. They're zeros and ones.
I gotta be honest. You mentioned the Green Lantern Silver Surfer story, one of my all-time favorite stories, and it holds up so well.
Oh, thanks, man. It was, those crossover stories like that, like Marvel versus DC and Batman Aliens, Green Lantern Aliens, Batman Tarzan, like all those things I got to do. Those are about the most fun you can have doing a comic because you're doing something that has never been done before. You're putting characters together that, for the most part, have never even met each other. So there's a delight of discovery anytime you do one of those things. And certainly Green Lantern Surfer was totally that for me because I was writing both books at the time. That's when you could be doing two books at two of the big two. That's a pretty rare occurrence these days, but the rules were a little bit more relaxed back then. So it was very cool to be having characters that I had been writing for a length of time come into the same space.
Well, your run on Green Lantern, I guess you had to be there because it was so controversial. One thing that always comes to mind when I think about that period, because again, Kyle's my guy. He was my first into the DC universe. But I remember before internet, you actually had a group start up the Heat, Hal's Emerald Attack Team.
Oh, yeah.
Which here in 2020, you're like, well, of course that would be a thing. But a little bit different back in the mid-'90s. There was no...
Well, we certainly expected that the story would be controversial and that there would be people who would be upset. Anytime you change anything in a comic, somebody's upset. Anytime you don't change something in a comic, somebody's upset. That just goes with the territory. But yeah, there was a group of, I think it was ultimately like less than 100 dudes, but it was like 75, a membership of 75 or 80 people or something like that, who were really, really pissed off about the whole deal and banded together to be pissed off together. And look, I get it. They didn't like the story. They were upset. They wanted things to go back the way they were. Okay. I've told the story before. There was one of the guys who was a leader of Heat was this guy who looked a little bit like Santa Claus, frankly. And I met him at a show in Portland, Oregon. And somebody pointed him out to me. And this is when the whole thing was, very much still, the hot war was still hot with this.
Right.
And the guy was pointed out to me and said, oh, that's the guy who's been agitating on the message boards and sending letters to DC to get you fired. And I thought, okay, well, we'll see how this goes. And ultimately he came up to the table and told me he was really not happy with the story we told. And I told him, look, we didn't, it's not personal. We didn't do it to piss you off. We didn't, gleefully twirl our mustaches at the prospect of people being upset. But I said, ultimately, it's editorial's decision to tell this kind of story. And I agreed to take it on. And if I'm sorry if you don't like it, but there are hopefully other books that you will like that you can read in the meantime. And he handed me the laminated card of Heat membership. Was two-sided card, and the back of the card, it had Heat's goals, and like the second or third one was to have me fired from the book and not employed in comics anymore. And I was like, well, thanks for the card, but I don't think I want to be a member of a club that is dedicated to having me unemployed. And he said, oh, well, just having a little fun or whatever. And I reminded him that I said, look, I guess you guys think it's fun, but this is how I feed my family. Yeah. This is my job. So you guys are more concerned with what happens to a made up person than what happens to a real person. And that's kind of odd, don't you think? And he kind of shuffled back and forth, and it was very obvious that whole equation hadn't occurred to him.
Yeah.
Like that this was a real person, and that, Daryl was a real person, and the editor was a real person, and they were valuing what happens to an imaginary character more than, they were concerned with what happened to real people in the real world. So anyway, we agreed to, I said, well, I hope you can find other stuff that you like. And he said, okay. And then he put a stack of books down in front of me and asked me to sign his Green Lantern comics. So.
Of course.
Which I did. So now now usually when I tell the story, I say, which I did, and I signed them all, yours truly, Rob Liefeld. But that's not true. But it's a better. But the myth is better than the reality. But I signed his books. I signed his action figure, and we didn't exactly part as friends, but he went his way and I went mine.
Again, I think you're right. I think that you can get so wrapped up in your fandom that you forget that human beings are involved. There's real people.
Oh, sure. Well, there's, I get it. It's perspective. I understand how people are really upset if they didn't like a Star Wars movie. I understand it, but I don't agree with it.
Right.
It's just a movie. It's just a comic. I understand being really, really dedicated to it, but if it's not your thing, just move on and find whatever thing is your thing. I always say there's more than enough content out there, whether it's film or TV or comics. There's enough out there that you're going to like than you will ever get to in your lifetime. So move on to that stuff and leave behind the stuff that you don't like anymore.
And we try to explain that to people at the shop. If you don't like a thing, it's okay not to read it anymore.
Yeah, I mean, don't
hate watch.
Yeah, don't spend $4 a month to hate read a thing, particularly if you like in a real sense, in a realistic sense. If you're buying that book, if you hate whatever it is, Green Lantern, Thor, whatever book has you pissed off, if you're buying it every month to hate read it, the message you're sending to the publisher is, give me more just like this.
You can't write on your dollar, I don't actually like this. This is a protest dollar. No, it's money. That's consent, right?
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, you're asking for, the message you're sending is asking for more. We got some copies of Green Lantern back in the day. We got some copies sent to the office that were like torn into shreds and stuffed into an envelope. And so you open the envelope and all of like confetti comes out. It's Green Lantern. It's Green Lantern 49. Ripped into tiny pieces and stuffed into an envelope. And, really, ultimately, the only thing you can think is, well, we got your money anyway, and so did the U.S. Postal Service. So I don't know what message was supposed to be sent, but.
Well, can I ask you a question? Again, and this is a Kyle question. I felt like that was one of the few characters, even though it was a corporate character. I feel like when you see him, first in full, right? He has that cameo, but when you see him in full, by the time in issue 50, by the time that you leave, he's grown up. He's not the same character that he was. And I felt like I got to watch him grow up month to month and face real things, even though this guy had a magic ring.
Yeah, well, that was always the intention, is that to a great extent, look, Hal was a hero before he ever got the Green Lantern ring.
Mm-hmm.
He's a test pilot. He's a fearless test pilot, which I guess maybe that's redundant. I guess all test pilots got to be pretty fearless. But he was a heroic, iconic figure before he ever got the Green Lantern ring. He's basically Chuck Yeager in a Green Lantern suit, which is cool, which is awesome, and totally works for the era in which he was created too. I mean, it's totally, right stuff kind of thing. But if the editorial decision was that, okay, Hal wasn't going to be the main character of the book anymore, my thought was to make the new main character as much of a contrast to Hal as possible, to see that, to do a different kind of character, because why are you going to do a knockoff of the one that is apparently not burning up the sales charts and not attracting the readership they wanted? So I grew up a Marvel kid. I grew up reading Marvel books for the most part. Spider-Man, Avengers, X-Men, and that Spider-Man archetype of the guy who was basically you, the everyman, was one that really worked on me as a reader when I was a kid, and also in films and stuff like that as well. So that's what I went for. I went for that everyman archetype, and somebody who was relatable to the audience as much as possible. You could see yourself in him. You could see yourself thrust into that position, not being ready for that role, and then having to grow into it, being forced to grow into it in a lot of ways. And also for me, it was my first regular DC gig. It was my introduction to writing in the DC universe to any great extent. I had done some short stories and things like that before. But for me, it was my way into the DC universe as a writer. So I was writing this character who had not been exposed to Batman and Superman and Wonder Woman and everything else that's in the DC universe. So it was my way of introducing all that stuff to the readership as well as to myself.
Right.
And Kyle was definitely intended to be the point of view character for the audience, both in his role as growing up and being a hero, and in his role in learning about the DC universe. I was really pretty jazzed when they pulled him into the JLA in very short order, because that's a perfect role for that kind of character. The rookie comes into the team, and you see the team through the rookie's eyes.
Which was really cool. Again, I just handed off one of our customers wanted a good Justice League story, and I gave him the first 12 issues of that Kyle era Justice League. So it's funny you mentioned that. So
it was a real treat to read that book. They were in different editorial offices, but obviously they coordinated with each other, and it was a real treat to see a character that Daryl and I had created, pretty immediately go into the JLA and be, and be one of the big seven, and also be for me, for the way that Grant used the character. I thought it was just, it was a really important piece to making that team work, because you had somebody that didn't have a relationship with any of the characters, and somebody for whom all of this was new and exciting. And I think when you have that kind of character in the book, it's easy to put the reader in that character's chair.
I also want to point out, people that haven't read that run, Dream of the Endless, Dream of Sandman fame, actually vouches that Kyle better Green Lantern than Hal Jordan. I'll never.
I paid no one to do that.
Well, so you did Green Lantern, you did the Green Lantern Silver Surfer, you did Silver Surfer for Marvel, and then you did DC versus Marvel. Did you have a pre-existing affection for Cosmic, or was that just the trajectory of your career?
It's just what was offered to me in the first place, because Jim Starlin brought me into the business, showed me the ropes, co-wrote Green Lantern scripts with me, or essentially told me to write Green Lantern scripts, and then he fixed them. And when Jim left to go do Infinity Gauntlet, which was obviously a wise move on his part, that worked out pretty well for everybody involved. So Jim left Surfer after issue 50 and cajoled Marvel into turning it over to me. So that was my first regular gig. And obviously taking over a book from Jim Starlin, there was a bit of momentum and sales force behind it anyway. So there was no audience for the book. I got to, get my feet wet and kind of make my bones on a title that had a lot of eyes on it already. And because Surfer was my first thing, there, I got stamped pretty early on as, the cosmic guy. So that's what led me over to DC. The editors at DC were reading Silver Surfer, and I had done a few Green Lantern Corps quarterly stories for them, and that worked out well enough. And so when they made a decision to go in a different direction on the Green Lantern monthly, they're on, let's get that guy from Marvel over here.
Gotcha. We have a question has popped up in the feed. It is from Adam. Big fan of your Green Lantern run. Why make Hal a bad guy? Was such a drastic turn. Before you answer, I want to point out my point of view. I feel like Hal was never as interesting as Parallax, but Adam wants to know the decision to make Hal a bad guy.
Ultimately, the decision was DC's. I mean, the decision was DC editorial. You as the freelancer who does not own Green Lantern generally don't get to make those decisions. You can come up with the idea and try to run it up the flagpole, but in this case, DC came to me and said, "We'd like you to take over Green Lantern." Which, cool, that's awesome. That's I love that Gil Kane costume, and Hal Jordan, Chuck Yeager write stuff. That's going to be cool. And they said, "Oh, wait, here's what your first 3 issues are going to be." And they told me the storyline, and in fairly short order, faxed me. That's how it was long enough ago that things were faxed to me, not emailed. There was a 1.5-page outline of here's what the general storyline we want for 48, 49, and 50. So I was, I had an outline, I had a roadmap, and all the rest of the details were mine to fill in. But the notion of Hal becoming a villain was very much in place from the beginning. And that's what DC wanted. That's what their editorial direction was. I actually never saw Hal as a villain, or as a flat out Lex Luthor kind of villain. To me, he was always maybe an anti-hero, and the character that I always compared him to was Magneto. Magneto was certainly an opponent for the good guys, and just like Parallax was an opponent for the good guys, but Magneto is completely convinced in the righteousness of his cause. He is, Dr. Doom, same thing. Dr. Doom and Magneto don't think they're villains. The best villains, the best anti-heroes are always the ones who think they're the hero of their own story. So that's how I approached Hal. I wanted at least a portion of the audience to kind of feel like Hal was right, that he was, he was trying to get back what he had lost, and that his position was validated in trying to do that. So I wanted to write him more as a tragic anti-hero or a tragic antagonist than a villain anytime he showed up. And I liked the character a lot as Parallax. I really felt like he added something to the DC universe in terms of being an antagonist for the heroes, and a cosmic level antagonist at that. That to great extent, a lot of the DC villains are earthbound and not. You got Darkseid, and that's about it out there. I liked having that character around to be able to do things with. Oh, now ultimately DC took a fan suggestion, is what it really was, and made Hal the Spectre, and that lasted for a few years.
Yeah.
After the Parallax persona.
So after Green Lantern, you do stuff John Carter, you do Red Sonja, Witchblade. You had a big run there. You've done Star Wars. You have been everywhere and worked in every genre.
I have danced with all the girls at the party.
You have. Was there?
And I like it. I like it that way.
Was there a girl you like dancing with the most? Is there a genre that you like playing in the most?
Of course, you like dancing with some girls better than others, but you don't tell any of them that, because you don't want them to find out which one is your favorite. Although, like in the case of John Carter, when Dynamite started doing John Carter, which is one of my ultimate loves. I mean, I grew up on Edgar Rice Burroughs in general and John Carter in specific, and I found those books when I was 11 or 12 years old and fell in love with them. And that, along with Star Wars, were probably the twin pillars of me wanting to be a writer, wanting to tell stories. So when Dynamite started doing John Carter, I got annoyed that I hadn't been asked to do John Carter. And I found Nick Barucci from Dynamite at one of the hotel bars in San Diego. And I said, "Look, man, the hell? Why didn't I get this deal?" When they relaunched the book a few years later, Nick reached out to me and said, "Hey, do you want to do John Carter this time?" And of course I want to do John Carter. And probably got not as good a deal working on the project as I could have and should have, just because, look, I would have done that for free. I just wanted to play with those toys, and I had a great time on my run on that book. I still look at it very fondly.
No, it was a cool run, and from one John Carter fan to another, man, you killed it.
Oh, thanks, dude. It was. Well, I got to fix the thing about John Carter that I always felt like was the missing element for him, which was he never had a worthy villain.
Yeah.
He's basically Superman on Mars. And to a great extent was one of the inspirations for the creation of Superman, I think. Guy goes to another planet and he can, he's got super strength and can leap tall buildings and all that kind of stuff. But in my first arc on the John Carter book, I gave him what I hope is a worthy villain, who was a Union officer, because John Carter was a Confederate officer in the Civil War, and his villain was a Union officer who was a much worse person than John Carter. So I would love to get back to John Carter at some point and do another story with that villain, because we had more planned.
Well, it was really cool. We're coming to the end of our 30 minutes. What can people do to support you right now? People watching this, they want some more Ron Marz. What can they do right now?
Go to your local comic shop and buy Ron Marz comics there. That's the real answer, isn't it? Obviously this is a rough time for shops. It's a rough time for everybody. Certainly everybody is dealing with this situation across the world, not just across the U.S., but and it's, the economic realities are kind of grim. But for comic shops that are kind of a razor thin margin business anyway, to not have new product and to not be able to have the doors open for going on a couple months now, it's tough. So I would say, if you want to support me, support your local comic shop. Buy back issues that you've been meaning to get. Buy trade paperbacks that you've been meaning to get, and get the new stuff as soon as it comes into stores. People can also go to ominouspress.com, where a lot of my Ominous Press work is offered. Beast of the Black Hand is a hardcover graphic novel. Harkin's Raiders is a hardcover graphic novel I did with Darryl Banks. Dread Gods we just did a hardcover collection of the stuff that I did with Tom Ranney. So like half the stuff that Ominous Press has published is written by me. So that's a good place to support. Just do what you can do. Keep the comic shops open as much as you can. We'll get through this together and we'll be better out the other side.
Ron, thank you so much for your time today. I know I've enjoyed it. People watching have enjoyed it. Thank you so much.
No problem, Chris. Let's do it again.
Yes.